The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small forward operating base in Afghanistan's Helmand province. Sergeant Elena Rodriguez adjusted her tactical vest one final time, feeling the familiar weight of her equipment settle against her body. The Barrett M82 rifle strapped across her back had become as much a part of her as her own shadow over the past 8 months of deployment. At 26 years old, Elena had already earned a reputation that preceded her arrival at FOB Shieldwall. The daughter of Mexican immigrants who had worked 3 jobs to put her through college, she had joined the army after graduation when her younger brother Miguel was diagnosed with leukemia. The military's medical benefits and her signing bonus had covered his treatments, but, more than that, Elena had discovered something within herself during basic training that surprised everyone, including her. She was a natural marksman. Not just good, but exceptional. During advanced individual training, Elena had broken several range records that had stood for over a decade. Her instructors had initially been skeptical when the quiet young woman from East Los Angeles consistently outshot seasoned soldiers, but the targets didn't lie. Every round found its mark with mechanical precision. The Barrett M82, a 50 caliber anti-material rifle weighing nearly 30 pounds, had become Elena's signature weapon. While most snipers preferred lighter rifles, Elena had requested the Barrett specifically. Its range of over a mile and devastating stopping power made it perfect for the mountainous terrain of Afghanistan, where enemy fighters often positioned themselves on distant ridgelines. But today was different. Today, Elena was being transferred to a new unit, one that desperately needed her skills. Captain James Morrison stood in the briefing tent, studying satellite images spread across a metal table. At 42, Morrison was a career Marine who had seen action in Iraq and Afghanistan multiple times. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who had made difficult decisions in impossible situations. When he looked up to see Elena approaching, he felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The situation at Patrol Base Viper was deteriorating rapidly. Located in a strategic valley that controlled access to 3 major supply routes, the base housed 43 Marines who had been under constant attack for the past 2 weeks. Taliban fighters had established positions in the surrounding mountains, using the elevation advantage to rain down accurate fire on anyone who moved during daylight hours. 3 Marines had been killed and 7 wounded in the past week alone. Morale was sinking, and the men were beginning to question whether they could hold their position. What made matters worse was that their previous sniper, Staff Sergeant Carlos Mendez, had been evacuated after taking shrapnel to his shoulder during a mortar attack. Elena listened as Morrison explained the situation. The Taliban had positioned at least 6 sniper teams in caves and fortified positions throughout the mountains surrounding Patrol Base Viper. These weren't random insurgents, but trained fighters who knew the terrain intimately and had proven themselves capable of engaging targets at extreme range. "We've tried everything," Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of frustration. "Artillery strikes, air support, even a helicopter assault last week. But they know these mountains better than we do, and they're dug in deep. Every time we think we've cleared them out, they pop up somewhere else." Elena studied the topographical maps, noting the elevation differences and potential sight lines. The valley floor where Patrol Base Viper sat was approximately 3,000 feet below some of the highest peaks. It created a natural amphitheater where the Marines were essentially trapped in the bottom while their enemies held the high ground. "What's the longest confirmed engagement distance from these positions?" Elena asked, tracing her finger along the ridgelines. 1,400 meters, Morrison replied. Staff Sergeant Mendez made that shot 2 days before he was wounded. But that was one target, and we estimate there are at least 20 fighters up there. Elena nodded slowly. 1,400 meters was well within the Barrett's effective range, but the challenge wouldn't just be the distance. The altitude, wind patterns, and the fact that she'd be engaging multiple targets who were actively hunting her made this an entirely different kind of mission. "When do we leave?" she asked. Morrison looked surprised. Most soldiers asked more questions, wanted time to study the intelligence reports, or at least expressed some hesitation about walking into what many considered a death trap. But Elena's quiet confidence reminded him of the best Marines he'd served with over the years. "Helicopter departs in 2 hours," Morrison said. "But, Rodriguez, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about taking out enemy snipers. The Marines at Viper have been pinned down for 2 weeks. They're questioning whether they can hold that position, and, frankly, so is command. If we can't neutralize these threats, we might be looking at abandoning a strategically critical position. Elena shouldered her rifle case and checked her equipment one final time. I understand, sir. But those Marines aren't going to abandon anything. We're going to take those mountains back. As Elena walked toward the helicopter landing zone, she thought about Miguel, now in his second year of remission and studying engineering at UCLA. She thought about her parents, who still couldn't quite understand how their daughter had become one of the Army's most effective long-range specialists. Most of all, she thought about the Marines at Patrol Base Viper who were counting on someone they'd never met to help them survive another day. The helicopter ride to Patrol Base Viper took 45 minutes, flying low through narrow valleys to avoid potential surface-to-air missiles. Elena used the time to study her equipment and review the intelligence files one more time. The Barrett M82 lay in its case beside her, along with 200 rounds of match-grade ammunition, spotting scope, rangefinder, and weather monitoring equipment. As they approached the landing zone, Elena could see why Patrol Base Viper was so important and so vulnerable. The base sat in a natural choke point where 3 valleys converged, controlling movement through a region that connected major population centers. But the same geography that made it strategically valuable also made it nearly impossible to defend against enemies holding the surrounding high ground. The helicopter touched down just long enough for Elena and her equipment to jump out before immediately lifting off again. As the rotor wash settled, Elena found herself looking at a group of Marines who had been living under constant threat for 2 weeks. Their faces showed the strain of prolonged combat stress, but she also saw something else: hope. Gunnery Sergeant Mike Sullivan approached her with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. At 38, Sullivan had been in the Corps for 20 years and had served with dozens of snipers over the years. But he'd never seen anyone quite like Elena Rodriguez. "Sergeant Rodriguez?" Sullivan asked. "I'm Gunny Sullivan. Welcome to paradise." Elena looked around at the fortified positions, noting the sandbags, concrete barriers, and camouflage netting that provided the only protection from enemy fire. Even in the brief moments since the helicopter departed, she could hear the distant crack of rifle fire echoing off the mountains. "How many casualties since this morning?" she asked. "2 wounded," Sullivan replied. Corporal Jackson took a round through his shoulder when he was moving between positions, and Private Martinez got hit by fragments when they dropped a mortar round near the communications bunker. Elena nodded and began unpacking her equipment. Around her, Marines continued their duties, but she noticed they kept glancing in her direction. Word had obviously spread that a new sniper had arrived, and these men who had been under siege for 2 weeks were hoping she might be able to change their situation. As Elena assembled her rifle and began studying the surrounding terrain through her spotting scope, she knew that everything depended on what happened next. The Taliban fighters in those mountains had proven they could hit targets at extreme range, and they knew these Marines were trapped. For the past 2 weeks, they had methodically picked off anyone who showed themselves during daylight hours. But they had never faced Elena Rodriguez. The first priority was establishing a firing position that would give her maximum visibility while providing adequate concealment. Elena spent an hour studying the base layout and the surrounding mountains, looking for positions that would allow her to engage targets without exposing herself to counter-sniper fire. Eventually, she selected a reinforced position on the base's eastern side that provided good sightlines to the most active enemy positions while offering protection from multiple angles. The previous sniper had used a position on the north side, but Elena's tactical analysis suggested it was too predictable and exposed. As she settled into her new position and began ranging targets in the distant mountains, Elena felt the familiar calm that came over her before a mission. This was what she had trained for, what she was born to do. Somewhere in those mountains, enemy snipers were preparing for another day of hunting Marines. They had no idea they were about to become the hunted. Dawn broke slowly over the mountains surrounding Patrol Base Viper, casting long shadows across the valley floor. Elena had been in position for 3 hours, studying the terrain through her spotting scope and memorizing every ridge, boulder formation, and potential hiding spot within 2,000 meters of the base. The Barrett M82 lay beside her, its massive barrel extending through a carefully constructed firing port. Elena had modified the position slightly during the night, adding additional camouflage and creating multiple escape routes. If the enemy snipers were as good as reported, they would quickly zero in on her position once she started shooting. At 0647 hours, Elena spotted her first target. High on the northwestern ridge, approximately 1,350 meters away, a figure moved briefly between two large boulders. Through her scope, Elena could see the distinctive outline of a rifle barrel catching the morning light. The enemy sniper was settling into position, preparing for another day of hunting Marines. Elena began her calculations. Wind speed was 8 km per hour from the southwest. Temperature was 32 degrees Celsius. The angle of elevation was approximately 15 degrees. She had fired thousands of practice rounds at similar ranges, but this would be her first combat shot with the Barrett in Afghanistan. Behind her, she could hear the Marines beginning their morning routines. Someone was heating water for coffee. Radio chatter indicated that patrols were being planned for later in the day. Normal activities that had been impossible for 2 weeks because enemy snipers made any movement during daylight hours potentially fatal. Elena placed her finger on the trigger and controlled her breathing. The enemy sniper was approximately 1,200 meters away now, having moved to what he probably thought was a better position. Through her scope, she could see him adjusting his own rifle, completely unaware that he was being observed. The Barrett M82 fired with a thunderous roar that echoed off the mountains. Elena immediately observed the impact through her scope as the .50 caliber round found its target. The enemy sniper disappeared from view, and Elena knew with certainty that he would not be shooting at Marines again. The reaction was immediate. Within seconds, rifle fire began crackling from multiple positions throughout the mountains as the remaining enemy fighters tried to locate the source of the shot that had killed their comrade. Elena had already identified her next position and moved before the first return shots began impacting near her original location. Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan crawled over to Elena's new position, his face showing a mixture of amazement and relief. "That was some shooting, Rodriguez. How far was that target?" 1,200 meters, Elena replied, already scanning for her next target. "There's at least 5 more positions active up there. They're going to be more careful now." For the next 4 hours, Elena engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse with the remaining enemy snipers. Each time she took a shot, they would attempt to locate her position and return fire. But Elena had studied urban warfare tactics during her advanced training and knew how to use multiple positions to confuse her enemies. At 1,045 hours, she eliminated a second sniper who had been positioned in a cave entrance on the eastern ridge. The shot required her to wait nearly an hour for the target to expose enough of himself to ensure a clean kill. When he finally moved to adjust his position, Elena's round traveled 1,456 meters before finding its mark. The psychological effect on both the enemy and the Marines at Patrol Base Viper was immediate and significant. Enemy fire, which had been constant for 2 weeks, began decreasing noticeably. Marines who had been forced to crawl between positions were able to move upright for the first time since the siege began. Corporal David Kim, a 22-year-old radio operator from California, approached Elena during a brief lull in the fighting. "Sergeant, the guys are calling you ghost shot because those Taliban fighters can't figure out where you're shooting from." Elena continued scanning the mountains through her scope. "They'll figure it out eventually. Good snipers learn from their mistakes." But, as the day progressed, it became clear that Elena's presence was fundamentally changing the tactical situation. By 1400 hours, she had confirmed kills on 4 enemy snipers and had forced the others to remain in concealment rather than actively engaging the Marines. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Viper Base, this is Overwatch. Satellite intel indicates enemy movement on the south ridge. Approximately 8 fighters moving toward elevated positions." Elena adjusted her position to gain better visibility of the southern approach. Through her spotting scope, she could see a group of Taliban fighters attempting to establish new sniper positions closer to the base. They were moving carefully, using natural cover and staying low, but they had made one critical mistake. They were moving during daylight hours while Elena Rodriguez was watching. The first fighter was approximately 900 meters away when Elena engaged him. The Barrett's massive round didn't just eliminate the target, it sent a clear message to the remaining fighters that nowhere within the weapon's effective range was safe. The remaining 7 fighters attempted to retreat, but Elena had already calculated multiple shooting solutions. Moving targets at long range presented unique challenges, but Elena had trained extensively for exactly this scenario. Her second shot caught a fighter who was attempting to bound between cover positions. The third shot eliminated a fighter who thought he was concealed behind a rock formation that provided inadequate protection from a .50 caliber round. By the time the surviving fighters reached relative safety, Elena had eliminated 3 more enemy snipers and wounded at least 2 others badly enough that they were no longer combat effective. The afternoon brought an unexpected development. A white flag appeared on the northwestern ridge, held by a figure who emerged slowly from concealment. Through her scope, Elena could see it was an older man, probably in his 50s, carrying only the flag. "What do you think he wants?" Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan asked. Elena studied the figure through her scope. "He wants to talk. That's the enemy sniper commander. I've been watching his position for 2 hours." The figure began walking slowly down the mountain toward Patrol Base Viper, staying in clear view and moving deliberately. When he was approximately 500 meters from the base perimeter, he stopped and waited. Captain Morrison arrived at the base 30 minutes later via helicopter, landing just long enough to assess the situation before the aircraft departed again. Morrison studied the figure through binoculars before making his decision. "I'm going out there," Morrison announced. "Rodriguez, I want you covering me. Anyone else makes a threatening move, you have authorization to engage." Elena positioned herself where she could observe the entire meeting while maintaining clear shots on multiple potential threat locations. Through her scope, she watched as Morrison walked slowly toward the enemy commander. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. Elena could see both men talking animatedly, with the Taliban commander gesturing toward the mountains and Morrison pointing back toward the base. Finally, they shook hands briefly before Morrison began walking back. When Morrison returned to the base, his expression was grim but satisfied. "His name is Commander Rashid. He's been fighting in these mountains for 12 years, and he says he's never encountered a sniper like Rodriguez." Sullivan looked puzzled. "What did he want?" Morrison glanced toward Elena's position. "He wanted to know if our sniper was American or if we had brought in a specialist from another country. When I told him she was a regular Army sergeant from Los Angeles, he didn't believe me." "What did you tell him?" Morrison smiled grimly. "I told him he could test that theory if he wanted to keep losing fighters. But I also told him that his men had fought bravely and could withdraw with honor if they chose to leave this valley." Elena continued scanning the mountains through her scope. "Are they leaving?" Morrison nodded. "Rashid says they'll be gone by morning. He lost 8 men today, including his 3 best snipers. He can't afford to lose any more." As evening approached, Elena maintained her position and continued observing the mountains. Through her scope, she could see figures moving along distant ridgelines, but they were heading away from Patrol Base Viper rather than toward it. The siege that had lasted 2 weeks was ending. That night, the Marines at Patrol Base Viper experienced something they hadn't enjoyed in 14 days, uninterrupted sleep. No sniper fire echoed off the mountains. No mortars dropped randomly into the base. For the first time since the siege began, sentries reported quiet sectors throughout their shifts. Elena finally allowed herself to rest, but she kept her rifle within arm's reach and her spotting scope positioned to monitor the most likely approach routes. She had learned never to trust that an enemy had truly departed until she could confirm it personally. As she settled into her sleeping bag, Elena thought about the conversation Captain Morrison had described. Commander Rashid's disbelief that an American woman had eliminated 8 of his fighters in a single day spoke to cultural assumptions that Elena had encountered throughout her military career. But results spoke louder than assumptions. The Marines at Patrol Base Viper were alive because Elena Rodriguez had proven that skill, training, and determination mattered more than gender or background. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, 43 Marines could sleep peacefully in a valley that had been a death trap just 24 hours earlier. 3 days of relative quiet had passed since Commander Rashid's withdrawal, but Elena remained vigilant. Experience had taught her that tactical situations in Afghanistan could change rapidly, and an enemy's retreat didn't always mean permanent departure. At 0530 hours on the fourth day, Elena's instincts proved correct. Through her night vision scope, she detected movement on the eastern ridge that didn't match the patterns of wildlife she'd observed over the past several days. The figures were moving with military precision, using cover and concealment techniques that indicated professional training. Elena immediately activated her radio. "Viper Base, this is Ghost Shot. I have movement on the eastern approach. Multiple contacts, appears to be a reconnaissance element." Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan responded within seconds. "Copy, Ghost Shot. How many?" Elena continued observing through her scope, counting figures as they moved between positions. "I count at least 12, possibly more. They're staying low and using good fieldcraft. This isn't the same group that withdrew." What Elena was witnessing was a new threat entirely. Intelligence reports had indicated that foreign fighters, possibly Chechen or Pakistani, had been moving into the region. Unlike local Taliban fighters who knew the terrain intimately but often lacked advanced tactical training, these fighters combined professional military skills with dedication that made them extremely dangerous. Captain Morrison arrived at Elena's position within minutes of her initial report. "What are we looking at, Rodriguez?" Elena handed him her spotting scope. "Professional military movement. They've established observation posts on 3 different peaks and they're coordinating their movements with hand signals. Someone trained these fighters well." Morrison studied the distant figures through the scope. After 20 years of military service, he could recognize quality when he saw it. These weren't insurgents playing at being soldiers, these were soldiers who happened to be insurgents. "Recommendations?" Morrison asked. Elena continued scanning the mountains. "They're probing our defenses and mapping our positions. Right now, they think they have the element of surprise. I can eliminate the observation posts, but that will alert the main force that we've detected them." Morrison considered their options. Patrol Base Viper's mission was to control the valley approaches, but, with only 43 Marines, they couldn't defend against a large, well-trained assault force. Air support was available, but calling in strikes required positive identification of hostile intent, and the enemy fighters hadn't yet committed any overtly aggressive acts. "How long until they complete their reconnaissance?" Morrison asked. Elena studied the enemy movement patterns. "Based on their current pace and the terrain they need to cover, I estimate 4 to 6 hours. After that, they'll probably withdraw to plan their assault." Morrison made his decision. "Take them." Elena had already identified her targets and calculated firing solutions. The observation post on the northern peak was 1,180 meters away. The eastern position was at 1,340 meters. The southern post was the most challenging at 1,520 meters, complicated by wind patterns and elevation differences. She decided to engage the closest target first, working her way out to the longest range. The Barrett M82 had never failed her, but engaging 3 targets in rapid succession at extreme range would test both her skills and her equipment. The first shot eliminated the northern observation post at 0612 hours. Through her scope, Elena watched the target drop immediately, but she knew the other positions would now be alert and looking for her location. Elena had already moved to her second firing position before the sound of her shot finished echoing off the mountains. The eastern target was more challenging because the fighter had taken cover after hearing the first shot, exposing only his head and shoulders above the rocks protecting him. At 1,340 meters, a headshot with a .50 caliber rifle required precision that bordered on the impossible. But Elena had trained for impossible shots, and the Barrett's accuracy at long range was legendary among military snipers. Her second shot found its target at 0614 hours. The southern position was the most difficult. At 1,520 meters, the target was near the maximum effective range of the Barrett M82. Wind conditions were variable due to the mountain terrain, and the angle of elevation added complexity to her calculations. Most importantly, the remaining fighter knew he was being hunted and was moving erratically to avoid presenting a clear target. Elena waited. Patience was as important as marksmanship in long-range shooting. She controlled her breathing and monitored the target through her scope, looking for the moment when he would be forced to expose himself enough for a clear shot. That moment came at 0627 hours when the enemy fighter attempted to signal the main force about the elimination of his teammates. He raised his radio above the rocks protecting him and held it there long enough to transmit a brief message. It was long enough. Elena's third shot traveled 1,520 meters through swirling mountain winds before finding its target. The radio fell silent, and the enemy fighter disappeared behind the rocks that had protected him until he made one fatal mistake. But Elena's success came at a cost. By engaging the observation posts, she had revealed her presence to the main enemy force. Through her spotting scope, she could see increased movement throughout the mountains as the foreign fighters adapted to the new threat. Morrison crawled to Elena's position carrying additional ammunition and water. Outstanding shooting, Rodriguez. But they know we're here now. Elena was already scanning for new targets. They were going to attack anyway. At least now they have to do it without intelligence on our positions. What followed was unlike anything Elena had experienced in her military career. The foreign fighters launched a coordinated assault that demonstrated sophisticated tactics and exceptional discipline. Instead of the frontal attacks favored by local Taliban forces, these fighters used suppressing fire, bounding overwatch, and coordinated movement that would have impressed instructors at advanced military schools. Elena found herself engaging targets at ranges from 800 to 1,600 meters as the enemy fighters attempted to establish firing positions that would allow them to suppress the Marines at Patrol Base Viper. Each time she eliminated one target, two more would appear from different positions. By 1,000 hours, Elena had confirmed kills on 7 enemy fighters, but the assault was intensifying rather than diminishing. The foreign fighters were using their casualties to map her positions and develop counter-sniper tactics. They're learning, Elena told Morrison during a brief lull in the fighting. Each time I shoot, they're getting better at locating my position. Morrison studied the tactical situation through binoculars. How many rounds do you have left? Elena checked her ammunition count. 47 rounds. But that's not the problem. They're coordinating their movements to force me into longer-range shots, and they're using multiple positions to make me choose which targets to engage. The enemy's tactical evolution was becoming apparent. Instead of trying to eliminate Elena directly, they were forcing her to expend ammunition while gradually moving closer to the base. It was a sophisticated strategy that required discipline and training that most insurgent forces lacked. At 1,045 hours, the situation reached a critical point. Elena detected a group of 8 fighters moving through a ravine that would put them within grenade range of Patrol Base Viper's perimeter. The approach route provided excellent concealment from most positions within the base, but Elena had maintained observation on it specifically because of its tactical value. The challenge was that engaging the fighters in the ravine would require Elena to expose herself to counterfire from elevated positions where other enemy fighters had established overwatch positions. It was exactly the kind of tactical dilemma the foreign fighters had been creating throughout the morning. Elena made her decision. Moving to a position that gave her a clear shot into the ravine, Elena engaged the lead fighter at 650 meters. Her shot was immediately followed by accurate return fire from 3 different mountain positions as the enemy fighters attempted to suppress her position. But Elena had planned for this. Instead of remaining in place after her shot, she had already moved to a pre-planned position that gave her shots on the overwatch positions while remaining protected from the ravine assault team. Over the next 20 minutes, Elena engaged in the most intense firefight of her military career. Moving between 4 different positions within Patrol Base Viper, she eliminated 2 overwatch positions while the Marines engaged the ravine assault team with grenades and automatic weapons fire. By 11:15 hours, the foreign fighters began withdrawing. They moved with the same discipline they had shown during their assault, covering each other's retreat and maintaining fire discipline even while taking casualties. Elena continued engaging targets until they moved beyond the effective range of her rifle. Her final shot of the engagement eliminated an enemy fighter at 1,630 meters, the longest confirmed kill of her military career. When the shooting finally stopped, Elena conducted an ammunition count and found she had 11 rounds remaining from the 200 she had started with the previous day. She had confirmed kills on 19 enemy fighters over 4 days of combat, with several additional probable kills that she couldn't verify due to terrain or distance. But, more importantly, Patrol Base Viper remained in Marine hands. Captain Morrison found Elena cleaning her rifle as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley floor. "Rodriguez, I've been in the Corps for 20 years, and I've never seen shooting like that." Elena continued her weapons maintenance. "The Barrett M82 is an exceptional rifle, sir. And these Marines gave me excellent support throughout the engagement." Morrison studied the young sergeant who had single-handedly broken 2 separate enemy assaults on his position. "Command wants to put you in for the Silver Star." Elena looked up from her rifle. "I was just doing my job, sir." The same job any qualified sniper would have done. But Morrison knew better. Elena Rodriguez had accomplished something that would become legendary within Marine Corps circles. Against overwhelming odds and professionally trained enemies, she had demonstrated that individual skill and determination could still alter the outcome of modern combat. As evening approached, Elena resumed her watch position, scanning the mountains for any signs of renewed enemy activity. The foreign fighters had withdrawn, but she had learned never to assume an enemy wouldn't return with reinforcements and new tactics. In the distance, she could hear the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching. Reinforcements were finally arriving at Patrol Base Viper, but they were coming to a position that Elena Rodriguez had already secured through individual courage and exceptional marksmanship. The reinforcements arrived as the sun was setting behind the western mountains, casting the valley in deep purples and oranges. 2 CH-47 Chinook helicopters descended into Patrol Base Viper carrying 46 fresh Marines from 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, along with additional ammunition, medical supplies, and communications equipment. Elena watched from her observation position as the Marines disembarked, noting their crisp uniforms and eager expressions. These were soldiers who had trained extensively for combat but hadn't yet experienced the reality of facing professional enemy fighters in terrain that favored the defender. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell stepped off the first helicopter and immediately sought out Captain Morrison. At 45, Mitchell had commanded battalions in both Iraq and Afghanistan and had specifically requested assignment to this sector after intelligence reports indicated increased foreign fighter activity. "Captain Morrison," Mitchell said, extending her hand. "I'm here to take command of this position and establish a permanent presence in this valley." Morrison saluted before shaking her hand. "Welcome to Patrol Base Viper, ma'am. I think you'll find the tactical situation has stabilized considerably over the past 4 days." Mitchell studied the base layout and the surrounding mountains through binoculars. "I've read the after-action reports, Captain. 19 confirmed enemy kills by a single sniper over 4 days of combat. That's either exceptional marksmanship or exceptional luck." Morrison pointed toward Elena's position. "That would be Sergeant Rodriguez, ma'am. And I can assure you it wasn't luck." As Mitchell approached Elena's position, she could see the Barrett M82 positioned precisely to cover multiple approach routes while remaining concealed from potential counter-sniper fire. The position showed evidence of professional fieldcraft, multiple firing ports, pre-positioned ammunition, and clear escape routes. Elena stood and saluted as Mitchell approached. "Ma'am." Mitchell studied the young sergeant who had achieved what an entire battalion might struggle to accomplish. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I've read your service record and the reports from this engagement. I've also spoken with several Marine snipers who know your reputation. They tell me you're the finest long-range marksman they've encountered." Elena remained at attention. "I've been fortunate to work with excellent equipment and outstanding support personnel, ma'am." Mitchell smiled slightly. Elena's humility was consistent with what she had read in her service record, but the results of the past 4 days spoke for themselves. Sergeant, I'm establishing a permanent Marine presence in this valley. I'd like you to consider remaining here as our senior sniper and training a new generation of Marine marksmen. Elena considered the offer carefully. Patrol Base Viper would likely face continued attacks from enemy forces, and the strategic value of the position meant it would require constant vigilance from qualified personnel. But she also thought about her original unit and the soldiers who depended on her skills elsewhere in Afghanistan. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I have obligations to my current unit," Elena replied. "However, I'd be happy to work with your snipers during the transition period and share tactical intelligence about enemy capabilities in this area." Mitchell nodded approvingly. Elena's loyalty to her original unit demonstrated the kind of character that made exceptional soldiers. "Very well, Sergeant. How long can you remain here for training purposes?" Elena looked toward the mountains where she had engaged enemy fighters for 4 consecutive days. 2 weeks should be sufficient to familiarize your snipers with the terrain and the enemy tactics they're likely to encounter. Over the following 14 days, Elena worked intensively with 6 Marine snipers who had been assigned to Patrol Base Viper. These were experienced marksmen who had completed advanced sniper training, but none had encountered the specific challenges presented by the mountainous terrain and professional enemy fighters. Staff Sergeant Robert Torres, a veteran sniper from Texas with 3 previous deployments, struggled initially with the extreme range engagements that Elena had mastered. "How do you calculate wind drift at 1,500 meters with these mountain air currents?" he asked during a training session. Elena positioned herself behind the Barrett M82 and demonstrated her technique for reading terrain features to predict wind patterns. "The key is understanding how the mountains channel air movement. You can't rely on wind flags or meteorological data at these ranges. You have to read the environment." She spent hours teaching each sniper to identify the subtle terrain features that indicated wind direction and strength, the movement of dust particles, the behavior of vegetation at different elevations, and the way sound carried across the valley. These were skills that could only be developed through extensive observation and practice. Corporal Maria Santos, a sniper from Puerto Rico who had joined the Marines specifically to prove herself in combat, showed exceptional aptitude for long-range shooting. "Sergeant Rodriguez, how do you maintain accuracy when engaging multiple targets in rapid succession?" Elena demonstrated the mental discipline required for consecutive long-range shots. "Each shot is independent. You can't let the results of the previous shot affect your concentration on the current target. Mental reset between engagements is as important as physical technique." The training intensified when enemy probing attacks resumed on Elena's 10th day at Patrol Base Viper. Small groups of Taliban fighters began testing the base's defenses, apparently trying to determine whether the foreign fighters' withdrawal had left any tactical opportunities. Elena used these contacts as live training exercises, allowing the Marine snipers to observe her techniques under actual combat conditions. When a 3-man enemy team attempted to establish an observation post on the northern ridge, Elena engaged the lead target at 1,240 meters while describing her technique to Staff Sergeant Torres. "Notice how I'm controlling my breathing pattern and trigger squeeze even though we're receiving incoming fire," Elena said as bullets impacted near their position. Combat stress affects fine motor control, so you have to train yourself to maintain the same standards under pressure that you achieve on the range. Torres took the second shot, eliminating an enemy fighter at 980 meters while Elena spotted for him and provided tactical guidance. The third enemy fighter withdrew, but the engagement had provided valuable training for both Marines. On Elena's 12th day at Patrol Base Viper, the base received intelligence that a large enemy force was moving toward their position. Unlike the foreign fighters who had attacked previously, this appeared to be a mixed force of Taliban and foreign elements numbering approximately 60 fighters. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell called Elena to the command post to discuss tactical options. "Sergeant Rodriguez, intelligence suggests this force is specifically targeting this position because of your presence here. Apparently, your success against their previous attacks has made you a high-value target." Elena studied the intelligence reports and terrain maps. "Ma'am, if they're coming here because of me, then leaving might be the best tactical decision for the base." Mitchell shook her head. "That's not an option, Sergeant. This position is too strategically important to abandon, And running from enemy threats isn't how Marines operate. The question is how we use your skills and the training you've provided to our snipers to defeat this attack. Elena considered the tactical situation. 60 fighters represented a significant force, but they would have to cross terrain that she and the Marine snipers now knew intimately. We establish multiple sniper positions throughout the base and coordinate our fires to create overlapping fields of observation. When they attack, we force them to advance through a gauntlet of long-range precision fire. The plan Elena developed utilized every tactical lesson she had learned during her time at Patrol Base Viper. 6 sniper teams would occupy positions that covered all possible approach routes, with Elena coordinating their fires from a central observation post. Each team would have pre-planned targets and backup positions to prevent the enemy from neutralizing them through counter-sniper fire. At 0445 hours on Elena's 14th day at Patrol Base Viper, the attack began. The enemy force launched a sophisticated assault that demonstrated they had learned from their previous failures. Instead of approaching from predictable directions, they established suppressing fire positions on multiple ridgelines while assault teams moved through dead ground toward the base perimeter. Elena coordinated the sniper team's response from her position, engaging targets at extreme range while directing other teams to concentrate on closer threats. Torres, I have a machine gun position at 1200 meters on your north ridge. Santos, there's a mortar team setting up in the ravine at 800 meters. The battle that followed lasted 4 hours and tested every skill Elena had developed during her military career. Enemy fighters used smoke, coordinated movement, and suppressing fire to advance closer to Patrol Base Viper than any previous attack had achieved. But Elena's training program had prepared the Marine snipers for exactly this scenario. Working as a coordinated team rather than individual marksmen, they systematically eliminated enemy leaders, heavy weapons teams, and key personnel while the base's other Marines engaged the assault teams with automatic weapons and grenades. Elena's personal contribution to the battle included confirmed kills on 11 enemy fighters, including the enemy commander who was directing the assault from a position 1,580 meters from the base. Her shot eliminating the commander at that range caused the remaining enemy forces to withdraw in disorder rather than continue their coordinated attack. When the shooting stopped at 0847 hours, 43 enemy fighters had been killed or wounded, with the remainder retreating toward the Pakistani border. The Marine snipers Elena had trained accounted for 28 of those casualties, demonstrating that her skills could be successfully transferred to other qualified personnel. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell found Elena cleaning her rifle after the engagement. Sergeant Rodriguez, I want you to know that what you've accomplished here will become part of Marine Corps legend. But, more importantly, you've saved lives by training these Marines to defend this position effectively. Elena shouldered her equipment for the final time at Patrol Base Viper. Ma'am, these Marines had the skills already. They just needed to learn how to apply them in this specific environment. As the helicopter arrived to transport Elena back to her original unit, every Marine at Patrol Base Viper assembled to see her off. What started as a simple formation became something unprecedented in most Marines' experience. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell called the formation to attention and, then, did something that violated standard military protocol but felt absolutely right given the circumstances. She saluted Elena Rodriguez, and held that salute until every other Marine at Patrol Base Viper had joined her. Elena returned the salute, shouldered her Barrett M82, and walked toward the helicopter that would carry her back to continue her service elsewhere in Afghanistan. Behind her, she left a Marine position that would never again face the kind of desperate siege she had encountered on her arrival. As the helicopter lifted off and began flying through the valley that Elena had helped secure, she looked down at Patrol Base Viper one final time. The Marines there would face future challenges, but they now possessed the skills and confidence to meet any threat. Elena Rodriguez had entered a Warzone with her Barrett M82 and changed the tactical balance in a strategically critical valley. More importantly, she had demonstrated that individual excellence, properly applied, could still alter the outcome of modern military operations. The Marines at Patrol Base Viper would remember her not as the soldier who had saved them, but as the soldier who had taught them to save themselves.